Want to make a difference in your community but not sure how? Go to GoFundMe.com right now and start a GoFundMe. Seriously. Your next fundraiser doesn't have to start in a school parking lot or a church basement. You can start a GoFundMe today in just minutes. Fundraise for yourself, a friend or family member, or an organization. All that matters is that you care about them. GoFundMe is the trusted place to fundraise for what you care about. With no pressure to hit your fundraising goal, but tons of tools to help you reach it, you can confidently start fundraising right now. Whether it's creative, local, or critical, your cause matters. And there's a reason why GoFundMe is backed by millions and chosen by fundraisers everywhere. It works, and it matters. GoFundMe helps you make a real difference. Start your GoFundMe today at GoFundMe.com. That's GoFundMe.com. GoFundMe.com. This is a commercial message brought to you by GoFundMe.
Please remember that any individual referenced in the podcast should be considered innocent until found guilty in a court of law, and any opinions or views expressed in the podcast are solely those of participants. Some of the content discussed in the podcast may contain violence or graphic descriptions and may not be suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
On December 5th, 1978, winter settled over Mississippi's Gulf Coast. The day had peaked at 59 degrees, but by nightfall, the air had dropped to a sharp 36. The roads lay still and silent. And along Ladnier Road, one of the few lights breaking the darkness came from a small brick convenience store, its wide glass windows glowing like a beacon in the night. Inside, 20-year-old Debra Gunter worked the graveyard shift at the Little General Store. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The cooler droned in the back. It was the lonely soundtrack of another midnight shift. Debra believed it was her chance to build something better for herself and for her husband. But Debra was young, determined, still searching for her own peace and happiness. And then, sometime in the dark hours before dawn, she was gone. The Little General Store once promised shoppers that it only takes a minute. For Debra, those words became something else entirely, because a minute was all it took for everything to change. 4 days later, her body was discovered in the woods of McIntosh, Alabama, 85 miles from the store. It was a brutal murder that has haunted 2 states for more than 4 decades. The truth has never come out of the shadows. This is the story of Debra Gunter and the search for answers that has never stopped.
Last time on Unforgotten.
To understand how an ordinary shift at a Little General Store turned into a mystery that's still unsolved, we have to go back.
Debra Lynn Mullis was born on May 20th, 1958.
Debra was just 16 when she met the love of her life.
Debra worked the overnight shift. Her family worried about her being there alone.
I came across an old advertisement with a tagline, "It only takes a minute." But in the late night quiet of a store set off the beaten path, a minute and everything changes.
A clerk at the Little General on Eden Street in Pascagoula said a man walked into the store with one hand shoved in his pocket and demanded money. She gave him $40 and he left on foot.
A quick dive into the archives turned up at least 25 Little General holdups between 1970 and 1977.
Heel flagged down a Jackson County deputy. Inside, they found Debra's purse, sweater, and car still parked outside. But Debra, gone.
For investigators, their concern began to harden into fear, and the case of 20-year-old Debra Gunter shifted from a missing person to something far darker and would change everything.
And now, discovery, coverage, and conflicts.
On December 9th, 1978, 4 days after Debra Gunter vanished, and on what would have been her 4th wedding anniversary, a man walked into the woods outside McIntosh, Alabama. Some reports say he was looking for scrap lumber. Others say aluminum cans. Either way, what he found wasn't either of those things. It was a body. Debra's.
She had been strangled, bound, and stabbed 32 times. Her hands tied behind her back with her own clothing. A sock or stocking stuffed into her mouth. Brutality laid bare in a patch of woods off Highway 43, next to an abandoned drive-in theater, just barely hidden from the dirt road. By the next morning, it was everywhere. Newspapers across Alabama and Mississippi splashed the story across their front pages. And from the very beginning, contradictions in the reporting muddied the truth. Up to now, we've traced Debra's final days, from her new job at the Little General on Ladinier Road, to her mother's warning over Thanksgiving, to the early morning hours of December 5th, when 2 other Little Generals were robbed minutes apart and Debra disappeared. Her family hoped for answers. Investigators feared what those missing hours meant. And now, with her body discovered 85 miles away, the case had shifted from disappearance to homicide, from uncertainty to horror.
But before we dive into the coverage, it's worth pausing, because this is where true crime gets complicated. People have always been drawn to stories like this. Part fear, part fascination. For some, it's about safety close to home. For others, it's the grisly detail. That appetite sold tabloids then, and it drives clicks now. And it isn't new. In the 70s, newspapers pushed out morning and afternoon editions. Presses clattered, reporters raced, and headlines often mattered more than accuracy or compassion for families still reeling from trauma. This case is no exception.
On December 10th, 1978, the Mississippi Press was the first to put Debra's name in print. Captain Darrell Crawford of the Jackson County Sheriff's Office told the paper her throat had been cut. He said little else. The press reported her husband and father had identified the body. The investigators weren't yet ready to say whether her abduction was tied to other Little General robberies that same night.
By the next day, December 11th, the coverage split in multiple directions. The Mobile Press Register relied on Washington County Sheriff William Wheat and Jackson County investigator Jack Walker. Wheat told the paper Debra's body was discovered around 4:30 p.m. Saturday by a man scavenging for scrap lumber. Walker said Jackson County was notified in response to the All Points bulletin they had previously sent out. According to the Register, Walker also revealed that Debra had been stripped from the waist up, and some of her clothing had been used to tie her hands behind her back and gag her mouth. The paper said an unnamed state toxicologist performed the autopsy, concluding she had been stabbed several times in the neck and strangled. Wheat told the Register that her body was transported to Mobile around 6 p.m., and that Jackson County officials brought her husband Donald and father-in-law Tom to identify her body at about 8 p.m. The same article said Walker believed 2 white men had abducted her between 3:30 and 4 a.m. and used her as a hostage in the later robberies. The Register wrote both agencies admitted they had few leads by Sunday night.
That same day, the Daily Herald reported that Alabama state troopers and the Washington County Sheriff's Office had joined the investigation. Sheriff Wheat told the Herald Debra's body was found at 4:30 p.m. Saturday by a man collecting cans at a dump site. Wheat also told the Herald she was clothed except for her blouse and stockings, her hands tied, a stocking stuffed in her mouth, and stabbed 32 times in the throat with a small knife. Authorities told the paper there was no evidence of sexual assault and that her murder likely happened at the dump, several hours after she was taken. Walker said Jackson County was investigating the robbery and abduction, while Washington County focused on the murder. Pascagoula police were trying to connect her case to the other robberies, and clerks had given description of 2 white men. Still, authorities admitted they had no leads.
The South Mississippi Sun added even more. Its morning edition carried the chilling subheading, "Convenience store clerk stabbed 32 times shortly after her abduction." The paper quoted Sheriff John Ledbetter of Jackson County, Thomas Wheat of the McIntosh Police Department, who happens to also be the brother of Sheriff William Wheat, and Pascagoula's Ed Reel alongside Walker. Walker said Debra had been stabbed 32 times with a small blade knife, likely a pocket knife, and that her body showed slight decomposition, suggesting she was killed the day she vanished. He said her hands were tied with her blouse and a stocking stuffed in her mouth, and that there was no evidence of sexual assault. The Sun reported Thomas Wheat as saying her body was found dumped near a garbage site off US 43 around 4:30 p.m. Saturday by a man scavenging for cans. Reels confirmed authorities were searching for 2 white men tied to the robberies. But even after saying no description would be released, the Sun printed one anyway, allegedly from Reels. 2 men, both about 5'10", one with blonde shoulder-length hair and the other with brown hair parted down the middle, which also matches one of the suspects that was described in the earlier articles. I think the article was released the day after Debra's disappearance.
The Mississippi Press followed up that same day with Washington County Deputy Farrell Grimes. Grimes told the press she had been stabbed numerous times, but declined to say how many, even though his own sheriff had already told the Herald it was 32. The paper reported Grimes believed she was killed where she was found, based on the amount of blood at the scene. It was also noted her body was identified by her husband Saturday night, contradicting the press's own earlier account that both her husband and the father had identified her.
And then the Associated Press picked up the story, pushing it far beyond the Gulf Coast. The Dothan Eagle ran a version, quoting Sheriff Wheat, who said Debra's partially nude body was found by a man scavenging for cans. Wheat was quoted saying she had been stabbed 32 times in the throat with a small knife, her hands tied and a stocking gagged in her mouth. The Birmingham News carried the same wire, but added that her murder apparently occurred several hours after the abduction, and that Wheat had traveled to Mississippi on Sunday to meet with investigators. After returning, the News reported, he said there were still no suspects, but speculated that the murder might be linked to the robberies. And in the Birmingham Post-Herald, the AP quoted state toxicologist Dr. James Small, who misnamed her as Dorothy L. Gunter, saying he could not release details of the slaying while it was under investigation. Yet in the same article, Thomas Wheat described the discovery site and gave the graphic details. A Washington County spokesperson added Sheriff Wheat had been in Mississippi in connection with the discovery.
The Daily Herald included a striking, unattributed detail that the Washington County investigators had transported Debra's body for the autopsy and only then consulted Jackson County the next day. Washington County officials told reporters they believed Debra had been killed at the dump site, pointing to the blood found there. And the unnamed toxicologist placed her death on Tuesday, December 5th, the very night she was taken. So by December 11th, depending on the paper, in less than 48 hours, not only had the local readers seen multiple versions of the story, but the most graphic details were now in print from Mississippi to Alabama to newspapers across the United States. Debra had been strangled, stabbed several times, stabbed numerous times, or stabbed exactly 32. She was clothed, partially nude, or stripped from the waist up. Identified by her husband or by her husband and father, or husband and father-in-law. And even her name wasn't consistent.
And I want to know who this spokesperson is.
I really do too.
Here's what struck us. 2 days after Debra was found, almost everything investigators knew was already in print. Today, that would never happen. A good investigation is a lot like playing poker. You don't show your hand. But reading those early articles felt like the cards were face up. If the killers were watching, they had a front row seat. And here's the irony. In 1999, Sheriff William Wheat told reporters just the opposite. The way it seems is everybody seems to think that whatever is in this office is public records, and it ought to be put in the papers and everything. But I don't think so. If you're investigating something and hadn't got the case solved or it hadn't been to trial yet, are you going to give it to somebody to publish in the paper? Some of this stuff isn't ready for the public. It's clear Wheat didn't feel that way in every case.
It's pretty amazing, actually.
Yeah, so much for confidential information.
Mm-hmm.
You just have to hope that your people aren't reading certain papers, I guess.
Yeah.
It's like you're telling them all of this information and giving them the opportunity to stay 2 steps ahead.
Mm-hmm. Like, well, okay, now I know what they know.
Yeah. Throw that knife away.
Mm-hmm.
We know it was a small one, like a pocket knife.
Or a ha-ha-ha, I guess they don't know what I really used.
Mm-hmm. I know that's a little bit rude. I mean, that is almost the way it seems when you look at that, because other cases that you don't see that in every case. And maybe it is more common than what we realize, at least back at this point. But when it's these gory, gruesome, vivid headlines to grab, slaying and all of these, words to grab attention. And then you have all these graphic details that are published in an active investigation where you may or may not have leads. How are you going to corroborate anything anybody brings to you? How do you know that what they're saying isn't just because they've read it in the newspaper?
Right. You can argue to say, well, not everybody reads the paper. But back in 1970s and even in the 80s still, we have to remember the internet and all of that. We didn't get news from there. We got them from newspapers, and the newspapers advertised on the street.
And almost everybody got the newspaper.
Everybody got it. And even everybody who didn't get it delivered to them, it would be like on a corner newsstand or, that kind of thing. It was in everybody's face. That was kind of like, come and read it, get your paper, type of a thing that they used to do. Even in the 70s and, on into the 80s a bit. So.
Yeah, and they're picking it up when they're stopping to get coffee or they're, and if they, for whatever reason, didn't read the newspapers, their neighbor did.
Yeah.
And they're telling them about it.
Yep. But not every paper told the story that way. On December 11th, the Macon County Telegraph in Georgia ran a short, restrained article. Deborah's parents, Horace and Ruth Mullis, lived in Warner Robins, and maybe that explains the difference in tone. The Telegraph wrote simply, Debra Gunter of River Oaks Mobile Home Park was found dead Saturday near Mobile after being taken hostage in a robbery on Tuesday in Gautier. They reminded readers that Debra was a native of Danville, Illinois, that she'd attended Northside High School, and that she was a Baptist. Instead of focusing on the brutality of her death, the paper focused on her life. It listed her survivors, her husband, Donald of Gautier, her parents, Horace and Ruth, her sister Sarah, and her grandmother, Mrs. Mabel Van Note of Danville. It's striking. In Mississippi and Alabama, Debra was a victim in a string of violent crimes. In Georgia, she was remembered as a daughter, a sister, and a wife. And I have to bring attention to this idea that they had it right. I mean, that's what we are focusing on now in the day of true crime. There was, and still is, a lot of sensationalism out there, but there is also quite a movement in trying to get away from that and trying to focus on the victims. And so I think they did a great job as far as that goes.
I went back and forth so many times writing this with whether or not to include all of those articles that were published on the 11th and 12th. But I think it's important to note the chaos and inconsistencies and just how fast investigators were releasing information in this case when it was less than 48 hours old.
Yeah. Almost a disregard, really, for the investigation and the family and the victim.
Exactly. It was to me, somewhat reckless.
Mm-hmm.
Because you do have a family that is reading this, because we'll learn later that Deborah's parents actually came to Mississippi to look for their daughter. So they actually, when Deborah was found, had just gotten back to Georgia the day before. To me, it just seems irresponsible almost to have all of this out there. And I just thought it was really important to highlight, one, the fact that there was no compassion or empathy for the family or the victim, and that there was just this chaos and confusion and inconsistency, and that shapes how a case is remembered. It shapes how an investigation progresses, even now, decades later.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I got to that article from Georgia, it was just like, the more I read in the local papers, the more frustrated and honestly angry I was getting. And I had to go back and write and rewrite because I could feel my frustrations coming out.
Right.
It was just a relief to see it go from Deborah being this horrible tragedy, which is exactly what it was, to Deborah being a person.
Yeah. Another thing I was thinking about as I was reading all of this is, and it's probably...
Want to make a difference in your community but not sure how? Go to GoFundMe.com right now and start a GoFundMe. Seriously. Your next fundraiser doesn't have to start in a school parking lot or a church basement. You can start a GoFundMe today in just minutes. Fundraise for yourself, a friend or family member, or an organization. All that matters is that you care about them. GoFundMe is the trusted place to fundraise for what you care about. With no pressure to hit your fundraising goal, but tons of tools to help you reach it, you can confidently start fundraising right now. Whether it's creative, local, or critical, your cause matters. And there's a reason why GoFundMe is backed by millions and chosen by fundraisers everywhere. It works, and it matters. GoFundMe helps you make a real difference. Start your GoFundMe today at GoFundMe.com. That's GoFundMe.com. GoFundMe.com. This is a commercial message brought to you by GoFundMe.
Something we'll talk more about, but the papers are the ones publishing this. But it isn't just the papers being reckless by publishing. It's those releasing the information.
Yep.
And the multiple different people releasing the information, but there does seem to be a few key people. So.
On December 12th, the reward for information in Deborah's case was increased to $4,000. Little General upped their contribution to $2,500, and Deborah's family and friends filled in the rest. Investigator Jack Walker confirmed to reporters that authorities were working a few leads, but admitted there was nothing substantial. That same day, the Mobile Press Register ran not one, but two stories about Deborah's murder. Both articles carried the same content, only with different headlines on different pages. They repeated the same grim details already in print.
By December 13th, the Press Register was back at it, running yet another story. This one focused on the reward increase. Authorities had nothing new to give, and the reporting reflected it.
Then, on December 18th, a very different voice entered the conversation. In the opinion section of the Daily Herald, a Gulfport woman named Dottie Goad wrote a letter to the editor. She said, "I just wonder how many young girls like this will be killed before these convenience store owners wake up. Why isn't there better protection for women working all alone in a store handling money? Think of what a sad Christmas this will be for Deborah's family and friends. It seems to me that the law should crack down on these stores to either protect the women employees or raise the wages and hire only men." Reading it now, two thoughts come to mind. First, that line about raising wages to hire only men. It's a reminder that in 1978, the answer to almost every problem was apparently pay men more. Not exactly the kind of progressive workplace safety initiative you'd hope for. And second, the question Dottie asked, How many young girls like this will be killed before something changes? That part lands hard, because the answer, sadly, wasn't none. But we'll get into that in a later episode.
As 1978 wound down, Debra's case remained unsolved. On December 31st, the Mississippi Press ran a grim year-end recap. 15 murders in Jackson County that year. Debra's name was listed alongside the others. Alan Griffin, a 24-year-old abducted from Pascagoula and later found tied to a tree in Grand Bay. Thomas T.J. Catsby, whose accused killers were already awaiting trial. In those cases, arrests had been made or trials were underway. And then came the kicker. The article closed with this line: "If you're looking for a safe place, try Ocean Springs, which had none." Instead of a sober year-end reflection on brutal murders, it landed like a travel brochure. Safe streets for the price of someone else's tragedy.
The new year didn't bring much clarity, but it did bring new headlines. By February 15, 1979, the case took a startling turn. Alabama authorities had requested Debra's body be exhumed, not for a second autopsy, but simply to collect fingerprints and blood samples. Those hadn't been taken during the initial autopsy, which in itself raised questions. Why weren't such basic steps carried out the first time?
The request, authorities said, was tied to a car theft. Just after Debra disappeared, a car stolen in Gautier was recovered in Georgia with stains in the back seat that could have been blood. The Georgia Bureau of Investigations impounded it, but without Debra's fingerprints.
Or her blood.
If true, yeah. There was no way to confirm or rule out her presence.
And imagine being a reader at the time. Flipping through your morning paper and seeing, for the very first time, that a stolen car was suddenly part of the story.
Her family seeing this.
Yeah. When in striking contrast, just days after Debra's body was discovered, authorities had released graphic details of her murder. The number of stab wounds, the condition of her body, even what was used to gag her. Yet here, when a stolen car was introduced as potentially central to the investigation, there was nothing. No description of the car, no color, no make or model, no location of where it had been stolen, not even a time frame.
It's so backwards. So if you were following along in real time, you had no choice but to sit back and sift through the weeks of back issues, hoping to spot a brief mention of a stolen vehicle around December 5th. And if you were someone who actually had seen the car near Little General, someone who could have placed it in the area at the time of Debra's abduction, you never got the chance. That detail, that lead, never reached you. An opportunity lost before it ever had the chance to surface. Again, seems backwards.
It does. That seems like something you would have put a lot of detail in.
Mm-hmm. And left the other detail out because only the killer would know those things, right?
Right. Within a few keyword searches on the newspaper archives, we were able to find that a few weeks earlier, on January 23rd, the Mississippi Press had reported 19-year-old Michael McPhail of Isle of Pines Trailer Park had been arrested in connection with an auto theft. Police said McPhail drove the car to Gainesville, Georgia, where he sold it. He wasn't alone. An unidentified woman working with him had tried to steal a second vehicle, but in a twist that feels almost cinematic, promptly ran it into a ditch outside the business and abandoned it there. Served her right, trying to steal a car.
Mm-hmm.
But, I mean, God, could you have done anything more cliche?
Yeah.
The paper listed the business as Lyons Motors in Gautier. They actually misspelled Lyons, and it took me a little while to find this. What's noteworthy is that a 1970s listing shows Lyons Motor at 250 North Pascagoula Street, about 7 miles, or roughly 11 minutes, from the Little General store on Ladnier Road where Debra was working. That's close enough to raise eyebrows, though still not right around the corner. McPhail's record is littered with car thefts, and drug charges. So it's entirely possible this was unrelated. But the overlap is difficult to dismiss, especially given the exhumation order, the recovered car in Georgia, and investigators' decision to link those threads into Debra's case. And I should also note the unidentified woman was from Louisiana, so it's not like he had somehow recruited Debra to help him steal these cars. Because I realize now in talking about this that one could theorize that.
Yeah, I would get where you're going with that,
Yeah.
By June 1979, Debra's name was back in the headlines, this time alongside another young woman. On June 6th, the Birmingham News, and a few days later, on June 10th, the Mississippi Press, 22-year-old Sandra Kefauver had vanished from a magic market in Talladega, Alabama. The circumstances were chillingly familiar. She was working the overnight shift, and by 1 a.m., a patrolman stopped in and found her missing. Her car, her purse, even her shoes were still there. Friends said she often worked barefoot, so that wasn't unusual. But the scene, an empty store, a missing clerk, echoed Debra's case almost too closely. Jackson County investigators joined Talladega police to explore the similarities. Jackson County investigator Rudolph Thompson told reporters the MO looked the same. A clerk vanishing from a convenience store, no signs of struggle, personal items left behind.
Then, by the end of June, there was a break, but only in Sandra's case. Authorities arrested a man named Frank Reagan Jones for assaulting another clerk. During questioning, Jones confessed to killing Sandra. He even admitted that he'd gone back a week later to decapitate her body, fearing dental records would identify her. On July 2nd, part of Sandra's remains were located near Munford, Alabama, and her head was found 4 miles away. For those who are wondering about the outcome in Sandra's case, in April of 1980, the Birmingham News reported that a jury needed just 15 minutes to convict Jones of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life without parole, plus 20 years for the second attempted abduction. They were going to seek the death penalty in that case, but the district attorney said due to some legal complications, he decided to recommend life without parole.
Oh.
Because the only evidence they actually had connecting him to that was his confession. They didn't actually have any other stuff. Yeah. So he didn't ask for the death penalty just because he knew that would be a lot of appeals.
Right. In Debra's case, the FBI had joined the investigation by this point, and her exhumation meant her fingerprints were finally on record. Authorities compared them to prints found in the Georgia car, but MacPhail denied involvement, and nothing publicly linked him to Debra's abduction or murder. From there, the trail went cold. Newspaper mentions shifted from investigations to marriage announcements. In 1981, Debra's widower, Donald Gunter, married Faith Annette Bush.
Debra's case slid further and further into the cold. For decades, Debra's name faded from headlines. Her case was still in the books, but without new leads, it grew colder with each passing year.
Then, in February of 2013, the Sun-Herald brought it back to the public eye. Pascagoula cold case investigator Darren Versiga had reopened the file, hoping fresh attention might generate new leads. The coverage revisited the familiar outline of Debra's disappearance. The Little General on Ladinier Road, the unanswered call at 4 a.m., the store found empty except for a purse and sweater, the grisly discovery in Alabama. Authorities told the paper they hadn't been able to say for certain whether the robberies that night were connected, but no suspects had ever been identified.
The article also gave voice to Debra's family. Her mother, Ruth, recalled their last Thanksgiving together in 1978, when she urged Debra to quit her job. Debra had brushed it off, saying, "Oh, Mama, it's not as bad there as it is here." It was the last time Ruth ever saw her daughter. Her sister, Sarah, just 14 when Debra died, remembered detectives breaking the news in their living room. Her mother crying, her father trying to hold her, and Sarah screaming. Decades later, she told the paper, "There was no closure. She was here one day and gone the next. I didn't know what to do. I was lost."
Ruth said her husband Horace, often hard on Debra and an alcoholic unfortunately at the time, sobered up briefly after her death, shaken by the tragedy. Horace died in 2006, and Ruth herself passed in 2019, still without answers. The 2013 article underscored what investigators already knew. Time hadn't dulled the brutality of Debra's murder or the hole it left in her family's life.
3 years later, in April 2016, the Clarion Ledger reported that the FBI and Pascagoula police were looking at potential links between Debra's murder and two other Gulf Coast cases from the 1970s. One was the 1975 abduction and murder of 16-year-old Janie Sanders, found stabbed to death in Mobile County. The other was the disappearance of Clara Turk in 1979, whose case details remain murky even today.
Posters went up across Jackson County urging tips and warning residents to look out for a blue 1970s Chevrolet El Camino, a car reported near at least one of the crime scenes. Investigators weren't calling it a serial case outright, but they were clearly drawing lines between crimes that, for years, had been considered separately. And then, in December of 2022, Debra's story was back in the spotlight once again, this time through a special investigation by WLOX. More than 4 decades after Debra's murder, the case was revisited in a long-form feature. The story retraced her final night at the Little General, the unanswered calls, the empty store, and the shocking discovery in Alabama. It painted the picture not just of a case gone cold, but the lives left fractured in its wake.
In the years since Debra's death, investigative tools have advanced. DNA can now solve cases that once seemed impossible. But when Lieutenant Versiga revisited Debra's file, he discovered a problem no lab could overcome.
In the special investigation by WLOX investigator Darren Versiga.
This is in Washington County, Alabama. Washington County doesn't have anything left of this case because we were looking for the clothing.
The very evidence that could have unlocked Debra's case, her clothing, was gone. But we're not done yet, because Debra's murder didn't happen in a vacuum. Around the same time, a string of other cases shook communities across the Gulf Coast. In 1973, 13-year-old Rose Marie Lewandowski was abducted and murdered, and witnesses told investigators they saw a yellow car in the area. In 1975, 16-year-old Janie Sanders was abducted walking home from school, only for her body to be found hours later. In 1976, Robin Rodriguez was abducted from a Little General in Gulfport, her case hauntingly similar to Debra's. In 1978, Kathy Sue Carpenter disappeared in Washington County. In 1979, Clara Turks was abducted not far from where Janie Sanders was last seen. And in 1982, Diana Avera vanished from Searcy Hospital.
Each case has its own circumstances, its own unanswered questions. But the timing, the geography, and in some instances, the patterns make it impossible to ignore. So we're not going to, because they leave us with a larger question. Was Debra's case a single tragedy or one piece of a much bigger puzzle? Next time on Unforgotten.
My name is Lieutenant Darren Versiga. I am a lieutenant with the Pascagoula Police Department. I'm currently the only one in our department that works on cold cases. It was about somebody at least taking these cases out of boxes that were collecting dust and getting them back in the public's eye. They're looking at this is my family member, and you need to do everything you can for my family member. We have to understand, to have compassion when it comes to that. You just have to listen to the victim. We're not the victim. We're the person trying to answer what they need answered. Between Janie Sanders and Debra Gunter, This was happening all across the southern states anyway. When Debra Gunter was kidnapped, her mother had told her about a kidnapping from one of their stores up there just days before she came back here to be kidnapped too. These are rural sheriff's departments. And so when a new sheriff comes in, his deputies may not have ever been a policeman before in their life. They just put everything out. That was a lot that was done in the 70s. Be sure we don't lose it again and make the victim a victim all over again, or the family the victim all over again. Our bad day is something we can get over tomorrow maybe. Our bad day is the worst day.
If you have any information regarding the abduction and murder of Debra Gunter, please contact the Jackson County Sheriff's Office by phone at 228-769-3063 or through their mobile app. You may also submit an anonymous tip through Mississippi Coast Crime Stoppers via telephone at 877-787-5898 or through their website, which is linked in the episode description.
Since Alabama Cold Case Advocacy's creation, we have dedicated innumerable hours to researching and networking in an effort to provide the largest platform we can to the cases we share. We shoulder all associated expenses with Alabama Cold Case Advocacy out of our own pocket, including the subscription fees for researching and production of the Unforgotten podcast to provide a cost-free avenue for the victims' families of those cases.
We hope you will join in our efforts to raise awareness of Alabama's missing and murdered and support these families who have been forced to carry the immeasurable loss of their loved ones and the fight for answers. If you appreciate our mission and you are inspired to make a donation, your extra support will enable the ACCA to continue our research, share the cold cases, and help those families know that they are also unforgotten.
Unforgotten is an Alabama cold case advocacy podcast, recorded in conjunction with Riverside FM, hosted and distributed by Red Circle to your favorite podcast platforms. Content, research, artwork, and production are by Sellers and Stormy of Alabama Cold Case Advocacy. Credits for music, sound clips, special mentions, and research sources can be found in each episode's description. Your support helps us continue producing Unforgotten and further Alabama Cold Case's mission of advocacy and awareness. There are a few ways you can help us light the path. Make a one-time or monthly donation to Unforgotten through Red Circle, sign up for a one-time or recurring donation through the ACCA website, or subscribe to the Unforgotten Patreon channel for early access to ad-free episodes. You will find the links for all three in our episode descriptions. Another cost-free way to be of great help is to follow us on social media, but most importantly, whatever you do, tell everyone you know about these cases. Sharing their stories is one of the most effective ways to help find resolution for Alabama's cold cases. Be the spark. Thank you for listening, and until next time, remember, justice may be delayed, but the victims and their families remain unforgotten.
That was good. You did good on that one.
Thanks.